In the last lecture, we saw that Lambda functions are really modeled as functors behind the scenes. In this lecture, we're going to do the next logical thing we could do after understanding that, and that is trying to use Lambda functions as callbacks in our C++ code. So suppose we have a function like this which takes a callback, which is going to be used to either encrypt or decrypt. We have seen this at many occasions. Now we're going to see that we can actually also use a Lambda function as a callback with this function here. We also have another function we saw before. This is the modify function, which is going to be working on a box container of std strings, and we're going to be using this callback to modify things, either encrypting or decrypting. You're going to choose whatever you want. And we're going to see that we can also use Lambda functions as callbacks with this function here. So let's go down and look at another example. We have our getBest function, which is going to get the best things in a box container of things. In this case, we are storing in std strings. So we can pass a callback here, and we are also going to pass this as a Lambda function, and we're going to see how this works out. So we can go down and set up our callbacks here, and our callback is going to be an encrypt Lambda function here. So we're going to specify our input, and we're going to return a character which is going to be deduced by auto here. We can also set up another Lambda function which is going to decrypt, and we are storing the names for these functions in encrypt and decrypt here. So once we have this stored in our C++ program, we can go down and use them with our modify function. So we're going to encrypt and decrypt, and we're going to see that the data is printed out exactly as we expect here. So this is one example where we can use a Lambda function as a callback function, and this is going to work really well. You can use this if it helps the design you are going after in your C++ program. Down here we have another example of passing the Lambda function directly in place. So for example, here we can call our modify function, and the second parameter to our modify function is going to be this entire thing that we have here. Let's make sure you see it all. This is going to be the second parameter to our function, and it is going to be this entire Lambda function here. And this can be confusing to many people, but this is going to work really well. And you will be surprised to see that after you understand this, you're going to be doing things like this a lot in your C++ code, because Lambda functions are really much fun to work with. So this is something you can do, and we do the same here to decrypt, and we're going to see that we're going to get our data printed out in our stdcout statement here. We can also use our Lambda functions as callbacks in our box container of std strings. So we can call our modify function and pass our Lambda functions here. They are going to do the exact same thing we expect them to do. And we can also set up callbacks that we can use with our getBest function. The first one is going to be a Lambda function that compares two things based on the size. The second one is going to be a Lambda function that compares things lexicographically, and we can use them in our getBest function as we see right here and right here. Now that you know these things, we're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Here we are in our working folder. The current project is Lambdas as function callbacks. We are going to grab our template files and put them in place. We can copy this and put that in our code here. And we can grab our box container class. I think we can grab that from our functors with parameters lecture. We're going to put this back in our code here. If you want, you can grab these source files. In the resource section of this lecture, you're going to find these files. You can download them and use them right away to save on time. We're going to open this up in Visual Studio Code. That's what I'm going to do. And we're going to clean up a little bit because we don't need this clutter here. What we want to do is to include box container. Let's do that. We are going to go on top here and set up our modify function, which is going to take a callback satisfying this signature here. So the callback should return a character and take a const char by reference n, and it is going to do whatever it needs to do in the body of itself. In this function here, we are going to loop around and grabbing each character and modifying it using our callback here. And the result of the modification is going to be stored back in our string at a given index. This is what we are doing here. With this in mind, we can hop over in our main function and set up our callbacks. And we will set them up as Lambda functions because that's the subject of this lecture here. So we will set up a Lambda function to encrypt, and it is going to return a character. And this Lambda function is going to be stored in this variable. So we can use this guy as our callback. We're going to do the same thing for decrypting. And we can go down and use these guys with our modify function here. So we will print the initial text, which is going to be hello here. We will modify this using our encrypt Lambda function, and we will print the result of that here. After that, we will decrypt and get our original text back and print that out. Let's try and pass this through our compiler. We will use GCC, and the build is going to be good. As you see here, we can bring up our terminal window and we will run this. So let's clear and run Rooster. We will see hello as our initial text. We're going to encrypt it and get core, and we will decrypt this to get our original text back, and that's going to be hello here. Everything is working just fine, but the main message here is that we are using a Lambda function as a callback, and this is working really well. We can even pass the Lambda function directly. So let's go down and put in a separator, and we can actually copy the entire thing here. We can copy this, and we're going to say passing Lambda functions directly. And what we can do is grab the entire Lambda function here and pass that as a parameter to our function here. And this is going to work really well. So we can go down here and take out the name and put the entire thing in place. You're going to see that it is going to work. We can also grab our decrypting Lambda function without the semicolon and grab the entire thing. And we're going to put that in the place where we have decrypt here. And everything is going to work really well. I know this is ugly to look at and understand, but this is going to work. If we run our program, we're going to see that we're going to get hello. We're going to encrypt that and get core, and we will decrypt it and get hello back. And that's going to be printed out after this separator here. And this is going to work really well. Let's pass this through our GCC compiler. The build is going to be good, so we can clear and run Rooster. You're going to see that we get the text we want. And this is working really well. If you need this kind of setup, you can use that in your C++ program, and it is going to work really well. As another example, we can also go on top and set up our function, which works on a box container of std strings. And we can go down and play with this. Before we go down, let's look at this function a little bit. It is going to take a box container by reference. The box container is going to be containing std strings. The second parameter is a callback, which is going to be used to either encrypt or decrypt the data in each string. We're going to loop around targeting each string, and in that string, we're going to loop around targeting each character, and at each iteration, we're going to modify the character we find there. So if we are encrypting, we're going to be encrypting each character and storing back the result in the reference where we found that character. If we are decrypting, we will do our modification here and store the result back in the string where we got our input text. This is what we are doing here. Now that we have this, we can hop over down below in our main function and try this out. So we're going to put a bunch of hyphens here. And we are going to go down and set up a box container of std strings. We're going to encrypt the data, and we're going to decrypt the data again and get our original text back. If we build our code, we're going to see that this is going to work. And notice that what we pass here are Lambda functions that we have stored in these variables, and everything is going to fall in place and all is going to be well. Let's pass this through our GCC compiler and see if the build is good. The build is going to be good as you see here. So we can clear and run Rooster. We're going to see that initial text is going to be "the sky is blue, my friend." We are going to encrypt this and get this gibberish here. And if we decrypt this gibberish, we will get our original text back. and everything is working really well. Again, the main message is that we are using our Lambda functions as callbacks, and this is working really well. If you want, you can even pass Lambda functions directly in place like we did here, and that's going to work really well as well. Let's go down and set up another example. We're going to put our separator in place. We are going to go on top and set up our getBest function that we have seen before. It is going to get the best string in a box container of std strings. We're going to decide which string is better using a callback that we have here. And we're going to set up this callback as a Lambda function by going down below here. So let's do that. We are going to set up our Lambda functions as callbacks here. One is going to be larger in size, and it is going to compute which string is larger based on the size as we see here. And we have another one which is going to decide which one is better by looking at lexicographical order here. Once we have these in place, we can use them in our program here. So we will be calling our getBest function and giving it a callback. The first one is going to be larger in size. The second one is going to be greater lexicographically. And all these things are going to be set up as Lambda functions, as you see on top here. And this is going to work really well. Let's pass this through our GCC compiler. The build is going to be good as you see here. So we can clear and run Rooster. You're going to see that friend is larger in size and sky is greater lexicographically. This is really what we expect. And everything is working really well. This is all I had to share in this lecture, showing you that we can use Lambda functions as callbacks. This shouldn't come as a surprise because from the last lecture, we know that Lambda functions are really modeled as functors. And from before, we know that we could use functors as callbacks to functions, and everything is going to work really well. So if you need a bunch of callbacks in your program, now we have a bunch of options. We can either use regular functions, and we can either use functors, or we can even use Lambda functions as we have seen in this lecture here. Now that we know that Lambda functions are modeled as functors, we have enough basis to really understand how the capturing mechanism for Lambda functions works. We will start in the next lecture and see how capturing by value works under the hood. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.